Good day and welcome to this special interview in celebration of Youth Month 2025. I am your host, Michel John-Theobalds, Chief Registrar of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. And today with me are two very special guests. His Lordship, the Honorable Mr. Mario Michel, Acting Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court and founding President of the St. Lucia National Youth Council, along with Mrs. Yaniqueca Jean-Bart William, current President of the St. Lucia National Youth Council. Today, it is an honor to share this moment with our two special guests on this, the 40th anniversary of the formation of the St. Lucia National Youth Council. Good day to both of you.
Good morning, Madam Chief
Registrar.
It is wonderful to have you here once again, so let's just get right into it. My first question is to Chief Justice. It is in two parts. Firstly, what inspired the formation of the St. Lucia National Youth Council? And secondly, what were the key challenges faced in establishing it?
Well, what inspired the formation of the St. Lucia National Youth Council in 1985 was a felt need for unity and organization among young people in an era of significant restlessness among youth. There were very serious problems confronting young people then. You had youth unemployment rate of between 20 to 25% of the national workforce. You had a transition rate from primary school to secondary schools of under 30%. You had a serious paucity of sporting and recreational facilities in a number of our communities, particularly rural communities. You had the general lack of respect for young people, for the voices of young people. So, you know, you wait till you are spoken to and you say what is expected of you rather than to think and articulate your own viewpoints. These were some of the critical issues that we felt young people needed an organized voice. Young people needed a mechanism through which they could express themselves and help bring about solutions to problems affecting them. I should add, though, that quite apart from that being a St. Lucia situation, the United Nations itself created 1985 or established 1985 as the International Year of the Youth to address those sort of problems internationally. Because yes, as I said, we did have our problems, but so did several other countries in the world.
Wonderful. And with anything else, I imagine that there were some challenges in establishing the Youth Council.
Very serious challenges. In as much as the government of the day had established an International Youth Year Committee just prior to the advent of 1985 as the Year of the Youth, which committee was supposed to be organizing programs and activities for International Youth Year. And among the issues was, in fact, the formation of the National Youth Council. But there were some young persons who went around the country mobilizing young people, rallying young people together, and with the major aim to establish a National Youth Council that could take up the cause of young people. And the IYY committee, as it was called, and the Ministry of Youth, particularly the minister at the time, were not necessarily pleased with the idea that young people would have gone on their own agenda in their own time and create their own organization, particularly with the likelihood of somebody in the leadership who may not necessarily have been very pleasing to the status quo at the time.
Oh, there's so much history. There's so much more I would like to really ask, but I do understand that time is against us. But thanks for that snapshot of history. Current president, fast forward 40 years. How has the role and impact of the NYC evolved since its inception, and what challenges do you face today?
Okay, so NYC, St. Lucia National Youth Council, started off in Chief Justice time as a youth-led non-governmental organization. However, in this present time, it is an active youth participant organization in terms of where young persons are able to air out their voices and advocate for changes that they would like to see. So while Chief Justice time was actually the formation and putting things in order, during this era it is more or less of advocacy and ensuring that young persons have a voice and are basically given the right at the various decision-making tables.
And with anything else, there are challenges, no doubt.
Lots of challenges.
Maybe you could just highlight a few for us?
Yes, definitely. We have a few challenges where the organization, we're facing some financial constraints, and with modernization comes more demands. And because of this, we've been basically struggling to keep our secretariat, because most of our subvention would definitely go towards, upkeeping of the secretariat, which has been a huge challenge for us. But also in terms of lack of volunteerism. Our young people, back in the day where young persons would freely avail themselves to volunteerism, it has been a struggle where young persons now, they want to volunteer, however, they find it a bit challenging where most of them are unable to meet their basic survival needs. So they basically weigh in, I want to volunteer, but my work may be a bit more important, however, it may also play with the commitment that they would want to bring further along. So this is some of the challenges that the organization faces, and most of all, I would say getting support from young persons out there, because at the end of the day, and even corporate, simply because we're seen as the minority, which basically we're not, because we make almost 80% of the population. So we do have a powerful voice, but many times, and I guess Chief Justice can agree with that, we are most times seen as being tucked under the rug.
Oh dear. And our youth leadership has changed quite a bit over the years, in St. Lucia in particular. Chief Justice, can you share with us from your experience some of these changes and how you think youth leadership has changed over the years?
Yes, youth leadership has changed, as has the youth movement itself. We're in a different era, which has called for different modes of organization. The youth leader today must be not just eloquent and articulate in the normal modes of communication, speech and writing, but so too the youth leader must be technologically savvy to communicate through all the social media platforms and all of the modern devices that are available. The youth leader of today must also reach out to young people in the places where young people are. Back in the day, if you like to use that phrase, young people were mobilized through by going to Ancillary or Canaries this afternoon, or Soufrière or Choiseul the next day, or Labrie or Vieux-Fort the following one, or Micoud or Dennery the day after. That was how we mobilized young people. We went to the young people, spoke to the young people, whether in the clubhouses, the community centers, the schools, or by the block. The whole mode of rallying and mobilizing young people was a completely different thing. And the sort of leadership one required at the time, of necessity, had to be persons who had independent voices, who were capable of challenging the status quo, who were capable of saying, well, no, we're not going to do it like that. What we want to do is this instead. That is what was required then, which may not necessarily be the same as now. And the president raised an issue about funding and having to depend on a subvention. In my time as president, there was no government subvention. There was no support of any kind, at least initially, from government. So we were forced to find ways and means to fund the work of the NYC. And so we had to go regional and international to get funds to establish an office, to employ staff, to do our programming. And we were able to tap some of these organizations. Mind you, in fairness to the current leadership of NYC, one has to recognize the fact that these things operate in clusters. There was a time when the sector of youth was virtually the priority. And so many international organizations, from their program funds, 50%, let us say, would be devoted to youth activity. So it was to go and tap that. But then one time it was the women's sector, another time it was the farming sector. So maybe I was lucky to be there in an era where youth was a major priority, and we were able to gain lots of support internationally. As I've said, when I left the presidency of the NYC, I left $200,000 in the bank that was virtually able to fund the NYC virtually without more for the next year or two. I don't know if it's possible for Mrs. Jean-Bart William and her current executive to do that, not because of lacking in any ability. It's just that the market has changed out there.
Yes, indeed. And we have been speaking quite a bit about the issues or the challenges faced by the NYC. Maybe I could start with you, Chief Justice. Can you tell us, maybe if you could just choose one or two for the sake of time, tell us how you went about tackling these challenges. We've heard the issues. Just tell us a bit about what you did to tackle these.
It was mobilization and advocacy. We had the capacity to bring 300 young people together in any community at any time and force others to listen. In as much as there was a period when, as I indicated, the Minister of Youth may have adopted a posture of not recognizing the National Youth Council. But when we had an activity, just to pick a community, we had an activity in Miku involving 300 to 400 young people. The parliamentary representative of Miku will find himself there. He will not take the chance, despite what the minister is saying, of allowing 300 to 400 young people to be in his community, advancing this, advocating for that, and not being present. So by the work of the NYC, we forced others to recognize us and to deal with our issues as they were articulated by us.
Indeed. And that's the strength of a council. Yes. Madam President, I imagine that the status quo might have shifted a bit, but you still have your challenges. Could you tell us how you go about tackling these challenges?
Okay, so these challenges, many times I will basically touch on when I came in. Normally, it would be the top to bottom approach, meaning that based on what government says, then young people would act. But my executive and I, we've taken a different stance when we came in, and we said that what sense does it make to serve the young people and be the voice of young people when you do not know the issues that they face. So coming in, just like Chief Justice did, we took to the streets. We went to the blocks, to the ghettos. We went to actually, meet with those unattached youth, we call them, and the youth at risk, because we consider ourselves to be the saved ones, the intellectual ones, but those who really need the assistance, that's the place that you could find them. So because of this, we took to the streets to get an idea as to what are their issues, what are their concerns. And young people, many times they're being shoved aside, but they're very smart and they know exactly what they want. And because of this, we went in there and we came out with loads and loads of issues, and we were like, where are we going to start? And then we realized that a lot of the programs that were being filtered down to young people, it is basically not what they want. And when the challenge would be to mobilize them. We're now living in an era where everybody is sitting in front of a screen. And it is difficult to bring them out. Gone were the days where you would invite young people to a meeting. This will not work in an era now. All the food would be waiting there and you won't get them. So times have definitely changed. So what we now had to do was to find creative ways. So like instead of having that town hall meeting, we now needed to do community visits, community walkthroughs, sit with them, be like them, and get those answers. So that's how we basically get our activities. And also young people like to socialize. Yeah. So we had to tweak it a bit in terms of not making it strictly formal, but having that social aspect to it.
Wonderful. Chief Justice, you made mention of this tumultuous relationship between the newly formed NYC and the government. How has the NYC's relationship with the government evolved up until as much as your Lordship could speak of it?
I mean, it has evolved considerably. As I said, we started off in what one could call a very hostile environment, although all the hostility was one-sided. But we started in a very hostile environment that made it very difficult for there to be any type of relationship between the council and the government workers, youth and sports officers, because they were under their own directives as to how to treat with the National Youth Council. Over time, that has changed immensely. I mean, I did have a period that when I was the Minister of Youth, and there started to be an annual subvention to the National Youth Council. There started to be a number of things. For instance, no board of directors would be appointed for any major national organization or statutory corporation that did not have a representative of the sector of youth. I mean, these sort of things which were no, never, never in that earlier period, a lot of that began to change. And as I said once, we were able to get young people in the cockpit of the flight to their future, rather than mere passengers in the cabin being told when to embark and disembark.
I really do like that. I really do like that. And of course, through the years, a number of policies and programs would have had to be developed to aid the NYC in doing their job. Maybe if you could tell us, Chief Justice, either one or two of these initiatives that you think had a lasting impact, and then we'll move to Madam President to give her view on the same.
Well, some of the things that I believe done at the time which had a lasting impact was we had discussions on and eventual preparation of what was called a white paper on a national youth policy. So that coming out of that, St. Lucia had its first national youth policy. What were the policies of the government in relation to Sector A, Sector B, and Sector C. That took a lot of consultations to get the feedback of young people, and by the time the white paper was completed, the Ministry of Youth, the leadership of which, mind you, had by then changed, were forced to reckon with the views of young people on all of these issues. That, I think, was a very major achievement. I mean, you had a major difference made as well in terms of sporting facilities and so on for young people, where there was a level of agitation virtually in the communities that we needed this, we needed that. You had young people who already, a number of them were unemployed, out of school, but no way in which to utilize the time and talent that they had. And the answer to that was the creation of the facilities. And I think we could have been said to do a fairly decent job in getting these things done. And they're almost forcing governmental officials to reckon with young people. I remember us going into a particular community, a particular district, and having an activity there at a time when there was immense hostility from the Ministry of Youth. And the parliamentarian, then the Minister of Government, said, look, where the young people of my community are, that's where I will be. And if the young people, without mentioning the name of the community, if the young people of community X want to be with the National Youth Council, wants to do the things, programs with the National Youth Council, then I will give them 100% support. That arose from advocacy, from going out there, hearing the voices of the youth, heeding the voices of the youth, and getting activities and programs in line with their views and their voices.
Wonderful. Madam President, same question to you.
Okay, so in terms of impactful programming, that for me would be leading young people into programming. When I say programming, I mean like leadership, right? Leadership. And many of our young people do not really know how to advocate. And I see that as a huge problem for us, simply because young people believe that NYC should always be the voice for them. But I always say to young people that NYC is as strong as the people that they serve, and that is when young people can rally around the organization. And I don't see it as an organization, I see it as a movement. Once you pass through the walls of NYC, you should continue to lobby on behalf of our young people. And when I saw this issue of advocacy, and I know we're living in a time where young persons can be fearful for their life coming out and speak because of the level of, crime and violence around. And we had this program called the advocacy for the advocacy training for a sustainable Caribbean. And what we did is we brought in regional youth leaders to tackle the issue of advocacy, because while I spoke to some of our counterparts or the NYCs, we realized that this was a regional issue. So my executive and I decided, why not bring our youth leaders to St. Lucia and let us have some serious discourse about how we can become serious advocates for issues that affect us. And lo and behold, this was an excellent, the best 4 days I have had with my regional youth leaders. And then we realized that the issues were not isolated. We all sung the very same songs. And from that, we were able to have a total of 150 youth leaders from across the Caribbean to come to St. Lucia to discuss this. Also, my second one would be to have a national youth leadership course, where we would have certified almost 400 young persons via virtual session. It was ranging for 2 weeks, where we basically train them on what it takes to be a youth leader. Because many of us on the executive, when we got in there, we realized, hey, this is serious business. And we do not want other young persons coming up after us to be surprised just like us. So we trained 400 St. Lucians, and this was the biggest we've ever seen in St. Lucia. And young persons were able to learn about emotional intelligence, which we find is really lacking among our youth leaders. And we also thought of ways in which NYC can, become better, because over the years, NYC has kept the same structure. So we've really basically dig in to see what can change, what should change, and how we could keep NYC going until maybe next 100 years.
All right. Very powerful and very profound. Chief Justice, you would agree that the NYC has been doing a formidable job over the past few years, but I'm sure that they would appreciate to hear from you, just some advice to the youth leaders on overcoming obstacles and making a meaningful impact. What advice would you give to them today?
Well, first of all, to just take off from where Madam President was speaking about some of the things they did in training young leaders, I still believe it's something that is very important, must be continued. We did a lot of training on group dynamics, group leadership, program planning, confidence building, techniques of debating, a number of these things that have carried through some of these strengths that were created then, have carried through to an extent that we were discussing just before we started on air, that the image of NYC as a breeding ground for politicians. And I remember these things were said in my time, and our position was good. I mean, we're training leaders for the country in whatever sector, and the politics was not partisan. I was president of the NYC. I became a candidate of and minister in the Labour Party government. Ernest Hilaire was a vice president of NYC. He is now a minister in the government led by the Labour Party. Marius Wilson was a former vice president. He was a candidate and parliamentarian on the other side. Edward Innocent was assistant secretary of NYC. He was a parliamentarian on the other side. Ricky Alexander was, I think, vice president at one time. He was a candidate, albeit in his case an unsuccessful one, for the United Workers' Party. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. Part of the role of NYC is to build leadership in the country, and if it can produce 5 or 6 ministers and not on one side or the other, but on both sides of the political aisle, then good. Big up to the NYC. And so things which have sometimes been considered problems are in fact things that I certainly regard as achievements and successes of the National Youth Council.
Indeed, and no doubt stepping stones. And as we get ready to wrap up, because we don't have much time left, just any closing thoughts, including maybe your vision for the NYC leadership in St. Lucia? I'll start with you, Madam President, and we will give Chief Justice the last few words.
This is a very dear question to my heart. And coming into NYC, I came in wanting to give my contribution to the young people of St. Lucia. And just going through the tenure, I'm now realizing that it is not just making your contribution. NYC leaves that lasting impact that you can't say goodbye to, even if your time is up. But just going through NYC, the vision that I have for NYC is one where young people can basically be independent, get funding, have that level of that secretariat where they could have a program manager, where they could have office assistants, where they could have counseling services, open pantry, school tutoring, like just catering to the needs of young people, and you know, just having that secretariat that could provide those services, because you know it is very, very, very important. So I would like to see an NYC where young persons are able to say, well, yes, they're working for me. Yes, we are not being well, not challenged, but we are not being looked down upon, where when they go to those meetings, their ideas can be taken and recognition can be given for those ideas.
Wonderful. Chief Justice, as we wrap up.
Yes, well, I agree with a lot of what the President said in terms of things that must be done and the directions that the NYC must take. I believe, too, that it's very important for the leadership of the NYC to be bilingual. That is to be able to speak the language of young people, and the language that young people can hear, can listen to, and can relate to. And at the same time, speak the language that the decision makers in the country can understand and respond to. I think it's very, very critical that, as I said, the leadership must speak both of these languages. I believe it's very critical that the leadership of the NYC must continue the advocacy that from which the National Youth Council was born. It is a very proud legacy for me that 40 years after the establishment of the National Youth Council, there is still a strong and growing National Youth Council in the country. You can go around the Caribbean, the St. Vincent National Youth Council, Grenada, Dominica, none of them have survived close to 40 years. And other major national organizations, not necessarily youth organizations, a record of 40 years of unbroken service. Leadership, elections every 2, 3, 4 years. It has gone on a few times over the original 2 years. But the point is, the youth leadership of the NYC has always been elected. The NYC has always been there 40 years on. And I hope that can continue. I hope that the leadership will continue to be there, will continue to be dedicated and devoted to the continuation of NYC. You said for the next 100 years?
Yes,
it's possible. I would say 160. We'd round it off on 200 years altogether.
No problem.
And there you have it. I could not think of two better guests to have today as we celebrate National Youth Day and the 40th anniversary of the St. Lucia National Youth Council. My Lord Chief Justice, Madam President, thank you so much for joining us. And to you, our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. And to our young people, happy National Youth Day. I am Michel John-Theobalds. Thank you for listening.
Yes.